I had a client that made the biggest mistake of her life. She sold her home. She had reached out to me during the pandemic when the housing market was on fire and she was caught up in the frenzy. And despite my repeated attempts to try to help her, she insisted that she had thought it all through. She knew exactly where she was going and she just wanted to sell her home. So that's what we did. We put it on the market and it sold right away. Well, fast forward, and a few months ago, she reached out to me and she was distraught. She had deeply regretted selling her home. She said, I didn't think things through. I wish I had never sold it. And if it ever came back on the market, she was going to buy it. Now, there are right reasons to sell and there are wrong reasons. And that's why in this video, I want to share with you when you should never, ever sell your home so that you don't end up in a situation like she did. Now, the first thing that I never want you to do is try to time the market. Timing the real estate market is extraordinarily difficult and complicated. There's mortgage rates and inventory and employment and natural disasters and what's happening in politics. There's a lot of factors in play on what impacts a housing market. You take the Great financial crisis of 2008, for example, and that crash was as a result of mortgage lending practices and oversupply of inventory. If you fast forward to the pandemic, everyone thought it was going to be a repeat, that eventually prices were going to hit a plateau and then crash. The problem is mortgage practices were different because of the federal regulations that were put in place as a result of the '08 crash, and we have an undersupply of inventory. So a lot of people jumped in prematurely because they were trying to time the market. And that's what happened to Lisa. I'm going to call her Lisa. It's not her real name, but we'll call her Lisa. She wanted to take advantage of those price appreciation, all that money that she was accumulating in equity. And she didn't want to miss out because she was reading the headlines. She was anticipating what everybody else was anticipating, that there was going to be a crash, and she wanted to ride the wave. And the problem is that Lisa was operating, she was reacting emotionally out of fear. Fear of missing out and fear of a crash. She was assuming that what she was reading in the headlines was going to come true. And instead of taking a step back and reacting and maybe pressing pause and thinking about whether this is really something that she wanted to do, whether logically, from a transactional standpoint, from a business standpoint, this is something that really made sense for her right now. She didn't do that. She jumped in. She says, you know what? I have gone down this path before. I have sold homes and I was able to find something, probably because there was more inventory, but I can take care of it, no problem. I'll be able to find something. And she jumped in. And then she found herself in a pretty regretful situation. So what can you do? You can, first off, don't read the headlines, don't react solely to the headlines. You've got to lean into the data. You've got to absolutely look at the data, not what's selling, ad space on the local news stations. You need to make sure that you understand what is actually happening. You also need to make sure that you don't react emotionally. When you're trying to time the market, that's when you don't want to miss out. You want to jump in. And that can lead to some really ill-advised decisions. You want to look at this from a very pragmatic standpoint as much as you can to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row. Okay, so the next thing that I don't want you to do is I don't want you to sell without knowing your numbers. And what I'm referring to are your closing cost, your moving expenses, your capital gains. What is your net on your home sale after you pay all these expenses? And I have seen this in the past where folks will assume they know the numbers, but they don't actually do the research and find out truly what those numbers are. Now, when it comes to closing cost, that is something, to be honest, your real estate agent should go through in depth when you sit down with them. What is the commission, obviously, but then what are the title fees? What are the transfer fees? Do you need an attorney? Do you need a seller's attorney? What are customary fees in your county, in your neighborhood? Is there an HOA? Does the HOA require a fee? Do you have any outstanding fees in HOA? Do you have any outstanding fees with your water or your sewer? All of these things come into play so that you should know exactly what that net proceeds number is before you list the house. Now, another question that I get a lot is about capital gains. And I'm going to say right now that I am not a CPA. I am not a tax advisor. So I'm not really equipped to get into capital gains in depth. And truly, capital gains is a conversation that you need to have one-on-one because your financial situation is going to be different for everyone's financial situation. And it might be different. One person will pay capital gains, another person won't. You really need to have a conversation with a CPA to find out what your situation is. But what essentially capital gains is a tax on the profit of your home. If you sold your home for $500,000 and you bought it for $150,000, you have $350,000 of profit. Now, your capital gains is going to be based on that $350,000. Now, there are exceptions to capital gains. The first $250,000 if you're single, $500,000 if you're married. That is a one-time exception when you sell your home. You can also deduct things like home improvements. So if you bought the house for $150,000 and you did qualifying improvements of, say, $200,000, now you're up to $350,000 for your base price of your home, and now your tax is only based on $150,000. And at $150,000, if you haven't used your exemption, you can use it, you won't be taxed. So there are a lot of nuances on that because there's also ways that you can avoid paying capital gains, 1031 exchange for like-kind properties and so forth. There's a lot of different nuances to capital gains. And capital gains applies when you might not realize it as well. If you inherit a property, if you are, your parents are giving you a property. There are different ways to, if you do your research and you understand up front, there may be some things that you may want to do before you list the house for sale. So look closely at your numbers, talk to your tax professional, have everything written out. I'm a big fan of a good old spreadsheet to have all the numbers in front of me. Understand what your numbers are, because not knowing your numbers could fill you with regret and wishing you never sold your home in the first place. All right, the third thing that I don't want you to do is rush the process. Now, I had some folks reach out to me several years ago. They saw my name on a sign. They reached out. I went over to meet them. And when I met with them, they had a very specific price in mind. And they said, we think that the house is worth this amount of money because we've made all of these home improvements. And these home improvements make our house much nicer than the neighbors, and therefore our house is worth more. Well, I couldn't support that price. And I showed them the data and I said, listen, I understand why you did this, but I can't get that price for you. And they weren't okay with it. They were very insistent. So I excused myself and I said, unfortunately, I'm not the right agent for you. I can't get that price for you. I wish you all the best. They end up hiring a friend of a friend who was willing to do it at a discount brokerage, different discount commission, and get it on the market. Well, fast forward a few months and the house was still on the market. And not only was it on the market, they were getting lowball offers. And they ended up selling that house for far less than what they ended up wanting to get. It was far below the listing price. And I see this time and time again. And a lot of it has to do with lack of preparation, not having the things in place to help you get to that point of finding the right price, the right presentation to get the house sold right away. Now, their first mistake was overpricing, and they overpriced it based on emotional attachment because of everything that they had put into it on the home improvements. They also were pricing it based on what they needed to get out of the house to get them to the next house. And they also were putting too much weight on online valuations, your Zillows, your Realtor.com, Redfin. That is a recipe for disaster because your pricing should never be based on any of those three things, only data. The data is the only thing that determines what your home valuation is. Now, the other mistake that they made was overestimating on the home improvements. All home improvements are not equal. Not every home improvement will give you 100% return on your investment. Meaning, if you spend $20,000 on improving your kitchen, that does not necessarily mean you're going to add $20,000 to the list price. And falsely assuming that can get you into hot water. And then lastly, their biggest mistake was assuming that all agents are the same. Now, I talk a lot about that on this channel, the 20% agent versus the 80% agent. And after 30 years of being in this business, in this industry, I will tell you that 80%, probably more than 80% of the agents are not fully skilled professional agents. They're not agents necessarily that have your best interest at heart. Some agents do, but they lack the skills and the experiential knowledge to be able to sit down and tell you the truth, not what you want to hear, but what you need to hear. That the price that you want is not the price you're going to get, because what you want is not the same as the market value. The market value is truly what you're going to get when you sell your home. And that same agent who can't convey that and help you understand by showing you data is also not going to negotiate as well on your behalf. They're not going to be able to market the property. How can you be a professional and market and be good at marketing a property if you don't even know the proper price where the house should be priced at? And knowing the difference between a 20% and 80% agent is a make or break, truly, because a good agent will be able to make sure you don't fall into those pitfalls. Because what happens is then you start making, as a homeowner, you start making those decisions based emotionally versus logically, which is really hard to do. It's hard not to make those decisions based emotionally. But that's what a good agent does. A good agent steps in and says, I understand why, because you spent all this money on those home improvements, but here's what you need to hear, not what you necessarily want to hear. Now, knowing the difference between the 20% and 80% agent does take time. And that's why I say don't rush the process. I always recommend interviewing at least 3 agents. Even if you're referred an agent from a friend, you've got to interview 2 more agents to make sure. You may still go back to that agent, but going through that process does make a difference, because everyone's needs is different. You might need an agent that's a little bit tender. You might want an agent that's really matter of fact. You may want a negotiator that's really like, whoa, we're going to get in there and negotiate. And you may want someone that is more of a peacekeeper that's still going to achieve the same goal, but has a different approach. Everyone's going to gel a little bit differently. It's not a one size fits all. Now, being in this business for as long as I have a network of agents. I have a preferred referral network of agents that I have vetted out, I have interviewed, I have conversations with. They are agents that are at my standard that I refer to all the time. Now, if you would like me to refer you one of these agents, I am happy to do so. And it doesn't cost you anything. I do get a small referral fee from the agent if you decide to use that agent. But for you, the referral doesn't cost you anything. So there's a link in the description, and there's a short form to fill out. I'll get in touch with you. I'll have some additional questions for you to make sure I understand what kind of agent you need, but I'll make sure you get in touch with a 20% agent to add to your 3 agents that I highly, highly, highly recommend that you interview. Now, the 4th thing that I don't want you to do is to prematurely list the house without having a plan. Now, I saw this a lot during the pandemic. I had a few clients that fell into this trap despite my attempts and pleading to please let me help you put this plan together. But nope, they said, we're good, we'll be fine. And what I'm talking about is knowing where you're going next. A lot of folks say, you know what, we've done this before. We have sold our house first and then figured it out on the opposite end. We'll just go into a rental, we'll figure it out when we get there. We want to do these things one stage at a time. And that's okay as long as you have a plan. And what you don't want to do is to go into this figuring out that plan after you sold your house. Knowing what the inventory is, really truly is, and not relying on all online inventory is a huge mistake. Just because you see inventory on Zillow and you see the prices and the pictures look nice, and you say, you know what, I'll be able to find something in my price range. And look, there's tons of inventory, because that inventory isn't always accurate. Sometimes those properties are not really for sale because they're sold, but Zillow still shows them as active. And maybe when you get there, you find out the neighborhood is not really as nice as you thought it would be. Not knowing what you're going into is a huge mistake. You also want to look at what your costs are. What are your costs now versus what your future costs are? So you really want to know what this home, okay, what's it going to cost, but also what are the carrying costs? Taxes, what the updated taxes. Do not rely on what's in the listing. A lot of real estate agents don't put updated information. They'll put whatever is in MLS, which sometimes is a year behind. And the way home taxes, home values have increased, home taxes are increasing, that number isn't always accurate. You want to make sure you get the accurate number right from the assessor's office on the house that you're looking at. You want to make sure you understand the HOA fees. How do the dues work? Even get into utility costs. I always recommend, especially if you're moving from one climate to another, even on a grid standpoint, from an energy standpoint, even if you're going from one cold climate to another cold climate, electricity might be a little bit more expensive where you're moving to. You want to understand exactly what those carrying costs are on that future property. So what I want you to do is I want you to have all your ducks lined up. Now you may do the research and then press pause. That's fine, but you got to do the research. And I want you to interview 3 buyer's agents. I don't want you to just call the listing agent on the property that you're interested in and then meet with them. Please don't do that. That is not a good idea. In this market, they're not looking out for you. You want to make sure that you interview, get a referral. If you know someone in the area, I can help you with that as well. But you want to make sure that you interview at least 3 agents. And that might mean having a 1-day buyer agency agreement with multiple agents to test drive them, so to speak. But you want to go through that process. You also want to physically get there. And I had a client recently that bought a house in Plymouth that lived in California. And it's not as easy just to jump on a plane when a home comes on the market. The inventory is very tight here. Homes don't stick around very long. However, they came out several times to investigate the areas, and they knew what neighborhoods they liked and which ones that didn't fit what they were looking for. But they came here physically. They knew what was here when that house came on the market so they could safely make an offer sight unseen. So do your homework. Investigate, interview the agents, know the area, know what the market is doing in that particular area, so you don't end up in a situation with a home that is sold and now you're moving into temporary residence, a rental for a short period of time, and then you find out you can't find a property and it's going to take you longer. In the meantime, interest rates go up and home values are going up, and now you're in a situation where you regretted selling your home. All right, so I've covered a bunch of reasons when you should not move, but there are times that are justifiable reasons to sell. And one of those times is when you have financial burden. When you have financial pressures, that absolutely is a reason that you may just need to sell, go into a rental, figure it out. And I'm talking either your mortgage rate has adjusted, or maybe you got laid off and now the mortgage is too much for you to handle. Maybe HOA fees have gone through the roof. We've seen that a lot. Recent years, the HOA fees have gone through the roof, and now homeowners can't afford their home anymore. Insurance is another reason why you may not be able to afford your home. And if those reasons come up, that is a justifiable reason. Another reason might be significant life changes. If you've had a spouse that's passed away, going through a divorce, heading into retirement, maybe you've had significant health changes. Maybe you inherited the property. You're not planning to live there anytime soon. Or maybe you've just had a job relocation, and that job relocation requires you to move on a pretty quick basis. Those are also good reasons to sell. And then lastly, the house might be just too big or too small. If you have a growing family and you just need more space, or if you are heading into retirement and you don't need all the space, the kids are grown and gone, and you've got all the square footage that's costing you more money, then you don't need to hold on to the house. Those are very, very justifiable reasons, regardless of the market. And all of these reasons, it's when is good for you. And I firmly believe that you don't sell. This is not an investment property. This is your home. And you should never, ever sell because of the market. You should never sell on a whim or reaction to social media or headlines. You should only sell when it is the right time for you. And I will tell you, if you meet with a real estate agent and you ask them, is it a good time to sell? and they say, oh, yes, the market's doing this, they're an 80% agent. But why? Because they're unskilled. They're unskilled and they don't know that truly the answer needs to be, is it a good time for you? Now, selling a home and moving is a major undertaking, especially if you've been there for a number of years. And it is an emotional process, but you need to treat it like a business transaction because with proper planning and research and strategy, your story will not be like the stories in this video. I'm Jen Sylvester, and I'm here to help you be a savvy home seller.